Hello, good morning. Welcome to At Home with the Zen Gateway. As always, if there's somebody there, if you wouldn't mind either liking or just putting see and hear in the comment box so that I know that you can see and hear me. We've changed location. We're out of the utility room, and so we're in a slightly different venue this morning. Good morning, Steve. Good morning, Jackie. Hello. Hi. Thanks very much. You can see and hear me all right. Good morning, Olwyn, and Chris as well. That's lovely. Okay, I'm not using the headphones today, so hopefully there won't be too much extraneous noise. If you're having difficulty seeing me, then as always, just put something in the comment box and I will see it. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Great. Okay. All right, we'll crack on. So we're still with Wisdom of the Zen Masters, and today, this is our story for today. A master gardener, famous for his skill in climbing and pruning the highest trees, examined his disciple by letting him climb a very high tree. Many people had come to watch. The master gardener stood quietly, carefully following every move, but not interfering with one word. Having pruned the top, the disciple climbed down and was only about 10 feet from the ground when the master suddenly yelled, "Take care, take care!" When the disciple was safely down, an old man asked the master gardener, "You did not let out one word when he was aloft in the most dangerous place. Why did you caution him when he was nearly down? Even if he had slipped then, he would not have greatly hurt himself." "But isn't it obvious?" replied the master gardener. "Right up at the top, he is conscious of the danger and of himself takes care. But near the end, when one begins to feel safe, this is when the accidents occur." So the setting, we don't know exactly the setting for this, but I think we can probably presume this is a Japanese story. There is a practice in Japan of pruning trees, in as much to make all the branches. So you have the tree trunk and the branches, and you can sometimes see them in those Japanese gardens. All the branches are pruned so that they're all facing upwards usually, and it creates a sort of an aesthetic. And this is one of the jobs of the master gardener. And of course, the trees that they use are the evergreens, so they're those tall pine trees, very tall, and climbing right the way up to the top obviously is very dangerous. And perhaps just one other thing as well. I mean, I think, again, it doesn't say when this story was supposed to have taken place, but I think we can presume that it was not in the modern period. Perhaps it might be a couple of hundred at least years old. And the reason that I say that is that, at that time, obviously, most people weren't educated in the way that we are educated. That is, they weren't educated sort of centrally as such. People were educated locally. So you would be apprenticed to somebody, to a master or a mistress, who would teach you the skill, and that would be your trade, whatever it may be. And of course, I mean, to a degree that goes on today. But there was a big emphasis in those days about development of the person as well, and that would be part of the skill training. So you weren't just, as an apprentice, you weren't just being taught the skill or the craft or the trade. You were also being taught about your relationships and how to develop yourself as a personality, as a being. And so even though it's not officially Zen or even religious at all, there has always been this emphasis in China and Japan and certainly in Japan on what were called the ways. So each skill or a sport or a craft, whether it's calligraphy or whether it's a martial art, for example, they're developmental of the person, of the personality, as well as teaching the actual skill. And they're not, and although they are often associated with trainings, religious trainings like Zen. You get Zen and the art of, well, not just motorcycle maintenance, but Zen and the art of the tea ceremony or calligraphy. Actually, these these arts, these ways, are not part of the Zen tradition per se, but people often use them who are in the Zen tradition, but they are quite distinct and separate as well. But they still have a very spiritual element to them and a very spiritual meaning to them. So that needs to be kept in mind. And it's also why this story appears here in a collection of Zen stories. So the point of the stories, in a way, seems sort of very straightforward. We have this teaching that in fact, when you're in danger, you know you're in danger. But we get complacent when we think we're not in danger. And it's a curious thing, it's a curious element of human nature, but very true. I remember many years ago reading a book called Why Machines Bite Back. And it was by a technology journalist who made the sort of wry, tongue-in-cheek observation that we invent machines to make life easier for us. And in one sense they do, but then they create other problems that need to be solved. And he gave us an example, an incident that happened, I think, during the 70s in Scandinavia, in Sweden, where Volvo cars are made, and Volvos are extremely popular in Sweden. Anyway, Volvo brought out a new line, and they discovered very quickly that there was a design fault, that if you drove over 55 miles an hour, there was an increased risk that the brakes might fail. So the company did a massive advertising campaign saying to people, if you bought one of these cars, you need to drive below 55 miles an hour. You need to reduce your speed. Otherwise, there's this increased risk. And in the meantime, bring your car in to a dealership and, it's a small adjustment and we can fix the problem. But obviously, they'd sold so many of these that it took a long time, about 6 months, to get them all done. And when sort of social scientists looked at the statistics for car accidents on the road, they saw quite naturally that because people were driving more slowly, that the death rate went down. The number of there were still accidents, but because they were driving more slowly, the likelihood of death was decreased. But as soon as the design fault had been fixed, back up it went again. And the writer of this book used this as an example to sort of say, this is the sort of slightly perverse nature of things. We seek to make things better, but we create a problem in its wake. And the problem is that, of course, the safer a car is, the safer people feel they can drive it. So he sort of said, rather tongue-in-cheek, maybe what we need to do is to make cars out of cardboard and put a large metal spike in the middle of the steering wheel pointing at the driver's heart. And that is bound to reduce deaths on the road. Of course, that wouldn't happen, would it? Because it's dangerous for the driver. So yeah, we have this thing, when we think we're safe, actually that's when the accidents occur. And I always remember Venerable Myokyoni as saying that mammals, and of course we are mammals are by nature quite lazy. And she said there's good sense in that, because finding and eating calories, eating food, is a difficult thing to do. So if there's no need to rush around, then you just sit down and you go to sleep or you rest. And this is why, if you look on the savannah, you will see, apart from the grazers, like if you take the big cats, for example, or the dogs, they spend most of the time sort of lounging around underneath trees in the shade, because it's not until they actually need to go and do something like hunt or go and get water, or chase somebody off their territory, a rival, say, that they need to do anything. So they do nothing. Why would you waste calories? Which is sort of interesting, really, when you think about how busy we all feel that we need to be every single moment. We need to be organizing ourselves every single moment. Anyway, so yeah, so there is that. But it does have an impact on what we are doing in the Zen training, because Zen training, like anything, requires discipline, and discipline requires motivation. It requires consistency of effort, And it requires the ability to contain those moments when I think, oh, I really can't be bothered with this. Maybe just this once, I'm not going to sit meditation. I'm not going to sit zazen, that sort of thing. And it's very easy then for that to become a habit. And this is always a little bit, something that we need to be watching out for. And the other thing is, as well, is that it has to do with, those of you who are familiar with the 10 bull herding pictures, for example, will know that the Zen training is about a transformation of the energies of the heart, what we call the energies of the Buddha nature. Buddha nature is just a technical term. But it's a transformation. And the reason that we're transforming it is because, according to the Buddha's diagnosis, we are suffering and we are out of kilter with our essential nature because that energy is tied up with the delusion of I and my wants and my likes and my fears and all this sort of stuff. And so that means that energy is not available to respond to the situation as it is. We're always responding to, I am always responding to it from my own point of view. This is what the Buddha means by the delusion of I, the attachment to I being the cause of suffering, which he outlines in the Four Noble Truths. So that's a transformation. That's the energy is trapped up there, and the training is to free that. It is to free it from those self-created habits, and that requires quite a lot of vigorous energy. And basically, the way that the Zen method, if you like, works is that it drains that energy from that delusion. It gives it another point of reference. It gives it another center of gravity. And basically, the delusion is starved to death until it comes to a point where it's so atrophied and emaciated, it falls off. And then job done, basically. This is what Soka Roshi meant when he said of his students, he says, when a monk comes to me for training, I look at him and see if he has a problem. If he doesn't have a problem, then my task is to give him one as quickly as possible. And after that, it is simply to make his problem worse and worse and worse until the monk has no choice but to drop the problem. Once that has been done, then job done. He can go. Nothing else needs to be said. So there's always this sense of, right, okay, what is the energy going into? What is the focus of the heart right now? Where is it going into? If it's going into what I want and what I don't want, then this is clearly going against the Buddha's advice, particularly if we're sort of enslaved to it. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not to say that wanting something or not wanting something is in itself a problem. It's not. It's being attached to it all the time. It's feeling that somehow, unless I get my own way, then I simply cannot cope. Then we become tied to that self-belief, and hopefully that, through the previous talks, hopefully that is becoming clear. So we have this requirement. We have these sort of self-deliberate habits, and the problem is that by default, our energy and our focus is always going into them. If it's down to me, I'll always have my own way. So in the training program, in the training method, something needs to be created to counter that. And that rubs us up the wrong way a little bit. And that rubbing me up the wrong way produces energy, usually in the form of irritation and maybe frustration and some anger. But that's good because, as Master Hakuin liked to say, anger also is a precious energy, so do not waste it. So it's a similar process that we're seeing here. In the story of the tree pruner, the master tree pruner, he knew that energy was up. When he sees his disciple at the top of the tree, he knows that student is really focusing because his life is in danger. And it is the fact, rather like with the Volvo cars, it's the fact of knowing that we are in danger means that we are motivated to take care. So that formula of, as it were, creating a need, creating a necessity or having a necessity, that's what Soka Roshi meant by having a problem. Creating that necessity provides the energy that we need to keep going. Another good example of this actually was another one that Soka Roshi gave, which was he had a student who always used to fall asleep during Zazen meditation. And now he knew the student quite well. The student was quite well seasoned, and they were on a session. And the student, despite his best efforts, could not keep himself awake. So what Soko did was because they were in an old-fashioned temple, with the sort of eaves, the roof sort of went up like this, that classic sort of Japanese thing. And inside there are the rafters that go across in the crossbeam. And what he did is he got the monk to sit zazen on one of those rafters, because if he fell asleep, he'd probably fall. The monk did not fall asleep. And the thing is that it's not that you have to sit up in the rafters all the time. You're just breaking out of the habit. It's knowing that falling asleep during zazen can become a habit. And when something is deeply ingrained, even the conscious will cannot override the unconscious habitual forces. But in this case, the impulse for self-preservation is a much, much stronger unconscious impulse, obviously. And here it is cleverly used and skillfully used to get the student out of that particular predicament. And those of you who've read The Zen Way by Irmgard Schlegel, also known as Myokyoni, will know about the entrance begging. This is something that's done in the temples. So what happens is if when a monk is ready to go up to the training sodo, so normally what happens if somebody wants to ordain and go through the full Zen training, they will go to a temple first. They will ordinarily be ordained and become a monk. They will be broken in as much that they will learn meditation, they will learn the chanting, they will learn the services and all that sort of stuff. And when the temple priest thinks that the monk is ready, the monk will be sent up to the training sodo. And of course, this happened to Soka Morinaga, and he writes about it in his book, Pointers to Insight, his autobiography. And in the book, because he was very, very close to Master Zwegan, who really helped him out of the very difficult period in his life. So when Zwegan felt that Soko was ready to go up, he put his shoes on. Soko was putting his shoes on to go to the training sodo, the monastery, and Zwegan bent down and started tying his laces, and Soko pulled his foot away because the idea of the master doing up the pupils of the laces of the student was, shocking to him. But Zwegan grabbed hold of his foot and continued and tapped the lace and said, "Do not undo this lace." And Soko knew what he meant was, do not give up the training. Whatever happens, do not give it up. Continue. And so he set out and he made his way to the temple, to the training sodo. And what happens there is that they go up, they ring the bell. The guest monk comes out and says, "What do you want?" And he says, "Oh, I want to be taken in to do the training." And there's always an excuse. They'll say, "No, we're full. Go away." But the monk has to be persistent. The monk gaining entrance has to be persistent. So he rings the bell again, you see, and he comes out and he says, "No, I really want to come in and do the training." And the monk says, No, you can't. You're weedy. You're far too weak. You won't be able to cope with it. Go away," like this. And this goes on a little bit. And then after a while, he's allowed in, but he's not allowed into the main temple. He can only go into the entrance hall. And there, what he does is he kneels down in what's called Cesar, and he puts his sort of luggage, which is a bundle, in front of him, and he puts his hands over it like this, and he just places his forehead over in this sort of crouched, kneeling position. And there he waits. And he can wait 3 days to be let in. At night, obviously, he's fed. There's breaks for that. And at night, he's allowed in to sleep. But then as soon as they wake up in the morning, he's sent out. And he resumes his position. And you don't know how long you're going to be there. So it's an expectation. You have no idea. And so it's very tough. And then every so often, a couple of monks will come out. They'll just grab hold of you. They'll drag you out, out of the gate, down the road a bit, shake you about a bit, and throw you down, and then walk back in. And you have to then get up and go back to the entrance. And the reason that's done is because obviously to maintain that crouch posture for that length of time is impossible. So they do this to allow you to move and to exercise your muscles. And if you're a little bit weak or a little bit frail, then they'll do it quite a few times. If they think you're quite sturdy, then they'll do it less. But I remember Myokyoni asked the head monk, said, "Is it really necessary to do all that?" And he said, "I know it looks terrible, and it is. It's very, very tough." He says, "But if we didn't do this, then these monks would never have the opportunity to really work out for themselves whether they want to go through this. Because if they can't go through this process, this entrance begging, they're not going to survive in the community. And that creates a deleterious effect for the community. So, this is a way for them to really find that out for themselves. And this is what Soka Morinaga also found, because he was about a day and a half into it. He was really thinking, look, am I really wanting to do this? And it really struck him just how his attitude had changed when Swegan tapped that shoelace and said, "Do not give up." He was full of this sort of, "No, I will never give up. I will, cross oceans and mountains in order to do it." But, after a day and a half of entrance begging, you feel very, very different indeed. But you've got to find the strength to keep going. And that's the thing. That's where that energy training is really coming in. I mean, most of us as lay people, we don't do that, but we do need some sense of urgency when it comes to it. And this is why, even the Buddha said, when he was asked by his monks, how should we train in mindfulness, for example? And he said, it should be as a man who's carrying a bowl full to the brim with oil through a busy marketplace. And he mustn't drop a single drop of oil. And because behind him stands a man with a machete who is ready to strike off his head if he spills so much as a single drop. He said, "Do you think he would spill it?" And his monk said, "No." He said, "That's how you should be training. That is how you should be training." In a way, even just as a thought experiment, when we think, "Oh, I can't be bothered." Even just as a thought experiment, it can just, if we just remind ourselves of the tree pruner or the man with the sword, the Buddhas with the sword standing behind us, ready to strike off our heads, out of compassion, not out of hatred, out of compassion, we would strike off our head. So as then we can really pull ourselves together. Because the training is important, if we're going to do this, do it. As the old Zen proverb goes, when standing, stand. When sitting, sit. But above all, do not wobble. So this is carried out. This is carried through with a lot of activities. Certainly, when we're in a training place. So, for example, if we're in a temple, those who've been to a temple will know it's very exacting. One of the things that it's probably the most common task that you get to do in a Zen temple or in a Zen monastery is to clean, brush, dust, wipe. Everything is cleaned every single day, and there's none of this sort of, "Oh, well, it's not dusty today." You just clean it, and you just give yourself wholeheartedly into it. And there's a real energy that comes from that, but it's made a little bit more difficult. And those, for example, who've been to Shoboan will know, it's full of knickknacks, basically. There are knickknacks everywhere. I know nowadays people like to sort of declutter. Well, quite often in Zen temples, it's the other way around. They like to have lots of clutter. You're always, if you're dusting, you have to pick things up and move things. But the thing is, you have to put it back exactly where it was. And if you've ever tried that at home, it's not easy, to pick things up and to just sort of try it, just to try to put things back exactly the right way round in relation to everything else around it. But you have to move it. So like a mantelpiece, for example, strip it off, you wipe it, then you wipe each object and you place each object back. I mean, that if you really set that as a task for yourself, try it. You will find it produces a sense of strong focus, and you will find also that, you know, afterwards, after you've actually done it, there's a real sense of alertness to you, and that's what the task has done. That's how the task has truly affected you. So it's the same in the garden. It's the same in the kitchen as well. In fact, kitchens in Zen temples and Zen monasteries are basically tinder boxes, because you know that you're working to a timetable, so you have to get the meal out on time. You've got several dishes to prepare. You're multitasking, and you've got somebody barking at you as well. I remember one person saying, you know, there's a lot of similarity between Zen training and the army, and there is. They're not the same. But there is a lot of similarity, because both use that very energetic, very physical, very energetic. And afterwards, after you've done it, my goodness, it's a quite different feeling, you know, to sort of sitting and thinking about the Zen training or thinking about mindfulness. I mean, you're really alive and you're really in your body as well. And this is it. When we talk about making the energy available, that's what we're talking about. The energy is available in the body now, in the here and now, because the body is always in the here and now. It's never in the past. It's never in the future. The thoughts are in the past. I am in the past, or I am thinking about the future, but the body is always in the present. That's why we're coming back to it. That's why we come back to it, and we come back to it, and we come back to it, and we are always working to be fully in the body. So perhaps just to finish with a small Chinese story, but I like it because it really brings over that sense of determination that we have to draw on when we are going to apply when we're going to apply ourselves, particularly if it's to something that is going to be difficult and challenging. And this is the story about a man who has a beautiful jewel, something that he has fashioned himself, really beautifully. It is his prized possession. And he happens to be walking by the seashore one day in the sunshine, and as he turns it, the light bounces off the facets of the jewel, and the dragon, who lives at the bottom of the ocean, because in Chinese stories, that's where the dragons live, sees this wonderful jewel and this wonderful light, and of course dragons love jewels. So up he jumps, he grabs hold of the jewel, pushes the man to one side, and sinks down into his palace. And the man, now bereft and suffering his loss of his most prized possession, stands at the end of the stands on the shoreline, shouting out to the dragon, "Give my jewel back to me!" And the dragon just ignores him, this puny man. And he again says, "Give me my jewel back." And again, the dragon ignores him. And the man says, "Right," he said, "if you will not give my jewel back to me, I will go and get a bucket, and I will empty this ocean, bucketful by bucketful. And one day, your palace will be in the middle of a vast desert, and then I shall come in, and I shall take my jewel back from you." And the dragon laughed and said, "You, a mortal who lives a few decades, even if you spent every hour of every day of the rest of your life with a bucket, you could never empty." True what you say, but when I die, okay, I don't know if it's suddenly gone off. Okay. Well, I'll just continue with that story. You can always come back to it and hopefully see this recorded slightly later on. So the man said to the dragon, he says, "I know I cannot complete it in this life." He said, "But at some point in the future, I will be reborn again as a human being. And when I am, I shall come back and continue with this job and spend that life doing it. And when that life has expired, I will then come back again and spend another life doing it, and again and again. And it doesn't matter how many lifetimes it takes. I am determined to get my jewel back. You will be in the middle of your ruined palace, in the middle of a desert, and I will come in and get my jewel back." And dragons live for a long, long, long time, and he knew from the determination that he could hear in that man's voice that he meant exactly what he said, and by hook or by crook, what he forecast would happen. And so with reluctance, he swam up to the surface and spat the jewel out, landing at the man's feet. He picked it up, wiped it down, and went on his way. Okay, we'll leave this there. We nearly got through that one. Unfortunately, looks like we had a couple of Facebook gremlins. But anyway, yeah, hi Jackie, glad you're back now. Anyway, I've recorded the end of the story, so you can hear it on playback if you need to. Okay, we'll leave it there for this week. Wishing you a good week. Hopefully a bit of continued sunshine and good training as well. And again, if anybody has any questions or anything like that, you can always post them up now, as I say, underneath the video, or you can email them to me as well at thezengateway@gmail.com. Once a month, just to remind you, we do on the Zen Gateway, we do a Q&A. It's called Troubleshooting Zen Study and Practice. So if you do have questions about meditation, mindfulness training, or anything like that, just send them along to the Zen Gateway at gmail.com, the Zen Gateway at gmail.com, and I'll feature them in a future podcast. All right, thank you very much indeed. Take care, and see you next week. All the best. Bye-bye.